Hi everyone, Cheryl McNamee here with the first training session with my Bureau of Land Management Mustang, tag number 7782. Photographers who loved watching him in the wild named him Silvio. I'm assuming for the rare silver gene that he carries that turns his otherwise black mane silver. There are really only a handful of horse breeds in the world that have that gene, which of course doesn't matter now because he's gelded, but he did make some babies and pass that on first. He is a 7-year-old Mustang who was previously a stallion on the South Steens herd management area in Oregon. During his time in the wild, he had some mares of his own, made some babies, and I've posted some of his wild photos on his Facebook page. I don't know what actually spooked him there. I think it was something outside of the pen because he ran towards me instead of away from me. I'll leave a link to that page in the video description for anyone who's interested in seeing pictures of wild stallion Silvio with his ladies and babies. For anyone who might be wondering, how does one end up with a wild horse? I'll give a short little story here. Um, So the South Steens, Oregon herd management area that Silvio was from suffered a long drought, and several of the watering holes that the wild horse herds relied on for survival had dried up. Rumor has it that there was just one watering hole left that all of the herds drank from, and even that watering hole was beginning to diminish. So, in order to prevent famine among the wild free roaming horse herds there, the Bureau of Land Management rounded up hundreds of them by helicopter into catch pens, and from there they transferred the horses to the Burns, Oregon holding facility, where Silvio was gelded, tagged, freeze branded, vaccinated, and placed on the January 2023 online corral auction for pre-approved adopters to bid on. Some of the pictures that you just saw are of Silvio in the wild and then of him at the Burns facility. I'll leave links to the photographers of these pictures in the description. I would encourage anyone who's interested to go take a look at them because both of these people take beautiful pictures. So in the internet auction, I placed my bid on Silvio based on my gut instinct and a bunch of incorrect data they had listed for him. They listed him as a 10-year-old, but I found dated baby pictures of him in the wild taken by photographers who documented him as a foal in 2016. So that would put him at almost 7 years old at the time of the auction. They also listed him as a silver chestnut, but he's actually a silver bay roan pinto. I didn't know about the roan part until I got him home and saw him up close, but that was an interesting surprise. So they had also listed his height as 15'1", and after seeing him in person now, my best guess is that he is closer to 14'2", 14'3" ish. And I can't help but wonder, thinking back, if I would have even seen him in the auction if they listed his height accurately. Because I was searching for only horses that were 15'1" and taller. And so I guess it's a good thing that his height was listed incorrectly. Otherwise, I may not have even seen him, let alone chosen him. And that would have been a huge mistake considering just how magnificent he's turning out to be. So Silvio's auction media also included a 20-second video of him frantically jumping back and forth in a pen where they were kind of shaking flags under the gates to scare him into moving. And they do this so that potential bidders can see how the horse moves before bidding on them. It was that video that just kind of grabbed my soul and shook it and said, "This is your horse." There was just something about his eyes and his face that I just couldn't get out of my head after I saw it. So I bid on him and I spent more money than I ever spent on a horse, but I won him, and the money spent was well worth it. So he was transferred from Burns, Oregon to Ewing, Illinois, where I drove a long, back-breaking journey to the holding facility to pick him up. Here I am arriving at the facility. It was about, I would say 7 hours, including, refueling and uh, rest stops and things. The whole trip total was probably around 17 hours because when Silvio loaded up, he was just like spinning circles in that trailer and moving it all over the place. So I had to drive a little slower than I expected. And here he is in the pen at Ewing, and I almost didn't recognize him. Couldn't see his stockings and silver mane so well through all of the muck, but they were pretty excited because they were able to start putting horses out on pasture that week. So here you see him loading up in my trailer, and the long drive home. That certainly wasn't fun. He was bouncing all over in that trailer for like the first hour or so, and then after that, he kind of settled in and traveled real nicely. But here we are at home unloading. He was really scared to get off of the trailer, so I used the flag to tap on his butt a little bit and encourage him to come out, and he finally did. So for his first night, he just got some hay and water and got to depress from that trailer ride and get to know his new surroundings. And training started the next day. So here we are the next day with his first training session. It's important to note that at the beginning of each training session, I try to spend about 20 minutes or so just kind of doing what I call passive training time. And that's where I just kind of mind my own business, and I only look at Silvio out of my peripheral vision, just while I go about mucking the pen, filling his water, and just kind of standing around. Um, and I guess my idea with this is that I want him to see that I'm not a predator and I'm not going to chase him around and eat him for dinner. Um, when I first walk in here, he trots around circles, and right now he's hiding inside the barn. So, and he's kind of like watching me from way inside the barn, hoping that I'm not going to come in there. And so when I finish up here, you'll see as I walk away, he starts to peek his head out of the barn. There he is. So I moved far enough away for him to feel comfortable coming out of the barn. Um, and I'm only showing a tiny bit of this because nobody wants to see me mucking a pen for 20 minutes. You can see that he's kind of watching me, and he just wants to stay on the opposite side of the pen from wherever I am. And, he's had kind of rough experiences. Most of the Mustangs do with humans once they get caught. It's kind of a necessary evil that, the way that they have to round them up and corral them, and in order to do anything with them, yet they have to put them in a chute, to do their vaccinations and freeze branding and things like that. So whenever they see people, they associate that with being, pushed and poked and prodded and being made to do things that are scary to them. So here I'm just kind of ignoring him, and every now and then I'll take a look at him. Um, I don't want him to feel a lot of pressure from me. I just want him, I'm kind of observing him, he's kind of observing me. Every now and then I'll kind of take a look at him and see he's pacing back and forth. He's a little uneasy and scared that I'm even standing in there. And then in a minute here, I'm going to start the actual training, like active training. So now what I'm doing is I'm putting pressure on him by turning and facing him. You know, I turn my shoulders towards him, and then the instant he looks at me, I turn away and I look away. And what that's see right there, he looked at me, I turned and looked away. And I just keep doing this over and over. There, I looked away again because he looked at me. I want him to be less afraid of me. And in order to be less afraid of me, he needs to gain a little bit of confidence. And by turning and facing me and actually looking at me instead of running away, he's building up a little bit of confidence. Almost in a sense where he's thinking that he may be training me. Every time he looks at me, I turn and walk away. I look away and the pressure is relieved. And so he very quickly learns, oh, I'll just turn and face her and look at her, and then there'll be no pressure, there'll be no problem. Now here I'm being a little bit more active with it. I'm walking towards him with my hand out, and then as soon as he turns toward me, I walk away. And again here, he looked at me, so I just look the other way. And this goes on for a while. I might just put this on time lapse here for you. Although I think this is the part where he kind of runs into the pen, so I'll leave this in here before I do a time lapse. Now he looked away and I turned towards him. He kind of freaks out a little bit here for a second. And then he kind of calms down and stops. I don't know what spooked him there. It wasn't me because he jumped towards me and I lost the camera. I think he ran around the pen once or twice. It might have been someone walking past or a car driving past or something like that. I think about maybe 10 or 15 minutes went by before I realized that the camera was laying on the ground. And I recovered it. And so now you can see that the light bulb went off in his head. And every time I turn towards him or step towards him, he starts to face me. Be right there. And then I walk away to reward him for that. You know, I feel like it's my job here to show him that things are going to be different moving forward, that you know, the humans in his life now aren't here to just push him around and trap him and poke him and prod him. You know, he's here for this to be a two-sided conversation. And in order for it to be a two-sided conversation, um, he needs to stop panicking and he needs to look at me. And then we can start communicating. And so there, I gave him a nice big release because he stopped. He just looked at me. Oh, he's being sassy. Stomping because he knows now what he needs to do to get me to turn away. But he doesn't exactly want to. So when I ask him in these first couple of days, it's so funny and so cute. He just kind of, he'll stomp and he'll shake his head like, okay, darn it. Darn it. I guess I have to do it. But I really don't want to. But I'm gonna. He's so cute. I should also say that, while I think it's kind of cute, his stomping and head shaking, that there's a real fine line here also. And that sort of behavior can very quickly turn into a horse that, charges at you, bites, strikes, that sort of thing. And so I have to be real careful with my body language here because I don't want him to feel like facing up to me is a challenge. I'm not challenging him to a brawl here. I'm just asking him to have a conversation. And so in these first couple of sessions, he's just trying to work that out. He stomps the ground and he shakes his neck like, okay, are we going to have a brawl here in a second? And, I take a little step back and he goes, oh, wait, it wasn't going to turn into a brawl. What does this human want from me? And so now you can see that his bubble is getting smaller. When I first stepped into the pen, I had to be on the opposite side of the pen, like far side, in order for him to not be panicking. And even then, he was nervous and pacing back and forth, and sometimes crashing into the panels. Now that he is kind of bravely turning and facing me, and able to kind of switch into that left brain and just observe me. Now he sees that I'm not here to eat him. So this bubble is getting a little bit smaller, and every little movement that I make, you can see he notices it. Um, and pretty soon here, I'm going to start rocking back and forth with my weight so that he can start to get used to me moving a bit more. Because with these guys, you'll notice that if you try to take one step, see right there, he's like, oh no, she just took one step towards me. And then I rock back, and then I rock forward again, and back. And then I just keep doing this a few times. And then he takes a step forward, like, a little bit of curiosity there. So I asked him to face up again when he turned and looked away. And you'll notice that, I didn't walk into this pen and start, sending him around in circles, running and moving his feet and showing him who's boss. Um, I don't want that kind of a relationship with my horse. And eventually we're going to be lunging and long reining and doing things like that. But at this point in the game, I want him to know that I'm not here to just make him run around. I'm not here to just dominate him. Um, I'm here to be his partner and, to have a conversation. I don't want, and in order to have a conversation where it really gets through to the horse, they can't be in panic mode. They can't be running around scared of you. Um, and so even though this takes a little bit longer than it would if I had just walked in the pen and thrown a rope over his neck and kind of fought him through it, um, and there's a time and a place for that. If he had arrived injured and I needed to get my hands on him as soon as possible so that a vet could see him, then yeah, I probably would have run him around a little bit and put a rope on his neck. but that's not necessary here. And so, since that's not necessary, I really wanted to just do things in a way that show him that I'm listening to him as long as he's listening to me. Um, right there, he's kind of standing still. He's letting me get a little bit closer. So when we started, it took the whole length of the pen. This is a 40-foot by 30-foot pen. It's a little bit oblong. It took the whole length of the pen for him to not want to just like crash through the panels and run away from me. Now, we're at about a half or a third of the length of the pen away from him. In this moment, I had to step a little bit further away just because I see that he's trying to explore some things. And so I just kind of gave him some space and let him explore. Um, in the first two sessions, I noticed that anything that was a little bit different in his pen, he became really curious about and he needed to investigate. And so anything that he wants to investigate, I just back off and give him the space to do that because that's something that I really want to preserve in his personality. That's something that's going to make, training and actually doing other things with him fun if he, is curious enough to investigate the things that, we're playing around with. So here I am, going back to rocking back and forth from foot to foot. He's keeping an eye on me, but he's comfortable enough to kind of lower his head and look for some little bits of hay. And that's fine. If he wants to chew some hay while I'm working with him, all the better, because if they're chewing, they're more relaxed. A horse that has a tight jaw and isn't licking and chewing or isn't, able to move their mouth around um, is a very tense horse. And so if he's relaxed enough to be able to take a bite of hay and chew it while I'm working with him, then that tells me that he's ready to go the next step. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this into a time lapse here for a little bit because I'm essentially just repeating the same things over and over. Just kind of moving my stick around, um, trying to get a little bit closer. And I'm also trying to get him used to, some different movements that I might make when I'm around him. So sometimes my stick is going to move, sometimes my hand's going to come up, um, things like that. Anytime he turns and he looks towards me, now I'm not walking away to the other side of the pen. My releases are a little bit smaller, so I'll take one step back when he looks at me. And that's because he just doesn't need as big of a release now. So in the beginning, he needed a really big release, and I needed to just completely walk away and look the other way for him to notice. Now he's noticing when I just shift my weight back one step. And that's great. That's exactly what I want. And if this is done correctly, when it comes to time to halter him and teach him to lead, he's essentially already going to know how to lead because he's learned how to face me whenever I'm in the pen, to face me and pay attention to me. And pretty soon here, I'm going to start putting my hand up whenever I ask him to face me, and that, eventually will be my cue for him to face up. And you'll see me use that a lot in, the next few training sessions. And also, when he has his first leading lessons, that cue of putting my hand up to ask him to face up is going to be key, because then when we're teaching leading for the first time, all I have to do is put my hand up and walk, and he'll stay facing my hand no matter which direction we go. And so that comes in really handy to have a halter breaking session that is completely uneventful and non-traumatic. And, you don't have a horse that is, fighting and pulling and flipping over and stuff like that. You end up with a horse that thinks through it and already knows what is being asked of them. So then when you add a little bit of pressure with the halter or with the rope around the neck, they're okay with it. And then they start to associate that pressure with leading in addition to the hand cue. And I eventually would like to do some liberty training with him. I've done a little bit of liberty training with my other horse, and we have a lot of fun with it. And so with Silvio, I would really like to take that a step further and really have fun with it. So right now, what I'm doing with him right now is kind of priming the pathway for that, because I'm kind of teaching him to draw in towards me right there. And he's still a little bit scared. He's like, oh, that's a little close for comfort. I'm going to turn him walk away, and then I ask him to come back again. And this is, when other horse people, you see them do liberty training, and they have a horse on the other end of the arena, and they give him a cue, and the horse just kind of gallops to them and then rears up in front of them. Um, this is like the most elementary version of that cue here. So here he walks away, I walk towards him, put the pressure on a little bit. He faces me, I back up. And he's like, oh, get back there. I'm training you, human. And that was great. I just kept walking backwards because the draw there was really fantastic. There he goes again. So now he's coming to me instead of me coming to him. And that's exactly where I want to be here. And like I said, you have to be real careful here, because he was a stallion in the wild. And up until I think it was about 4 or 5 months ago that he was gelded. So it's entirely possible that he could still have some testosterone in there and still have that kind of fiery spark to, want to pick a fight. Um, and maybe not. I mean, you can see he's being kind of spicy and sassy here with it. And so I just have to be real careful to show him that I'm not challenging him. See right there? He's like pawing the ground, like, okay, there's a thin line here, lady. And I'm watching that and I'm respecting that. And I think that a lot of people have problems with this when they aren't watching that body language from the horse and the cues that they're giving you. And it escalates. And next thing you know, you have a horse that's lunging at you and biting at you. And I think that's, a good reason why you should have a professional at your fingertips. If you're working with one of these Mustangs and you get into a situation like this and you're not quite sure what to do, just stop and ask someone who's been there, because you're better safe than sorry. So one thing I kind of wanted to talk about is the different types of training. What I'm using here is actually called negative reinforcement. And, it's kind of hard to start out with positive reinforcement until you have some sort of a reward that the horse really wants, like a food reward or, back scratches or something like that. So at this point, I don't have anything that is a really great reward to him. It's possible that hay could be a good reward, but at this stage, I'm just starting out with negative reinforcement. And what that means is that I'm putting pressure on, and when he responds correctly, I'm removing the pressure that's the negative part of it. So negative means the removal of pressure. So negative doesn't mean negative in the terms of this is a negative way of training. Negative just means that you're taking something away, subtracting, in order to reinforce a behavior. So positive reinforcement would mean that you're adding something to the training for good behavior. So positive reinforcement would be if he faces up and I give him a treat. The treat is adding something to the training, whereas negative reinforcement, I'm removing the pressure. So that's why it's called negative. And there's a lot of controversy, I think, around it. There's kind of a bad rap that negative reinforcement has. It's what's used in sort of like the cowboy way of, breaking horses. And the way that I like to use it is the pressure, I like to be the least amount of pressure that's needed. And the release needs to be sufficient that the horse will repeat the behavior to get the release again. And overall, I'm going to be using a combination of both negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement with Silvio. And hopefully we'll start to use more positive reinforcement than negative. But I do feel like regardless, every horse still needs to know a bit of negative reinforcement training just because they're going to have to deal with pressure at some point, and there isn't always going to be a reward handy. And so, um, that's just something that we kind of need to work their nervous system through is that when you first start working with a horse, there's always this opposition reflex when it comes to pressure. And with negative reinforcement training, it's real easy to work through that with a horse. It's kind of designed for that. So, the pressure stays on until the horse releases. And when they release, it's kind of like an instant reward because they no longer feel the pressure. And that's going to help them in all kinds of situations when they're standing tied and something scary goes by. So they don't end up panicking and pulling back and breaking something. It also helps with things like if they get their leg caught up in a rope or a fence. With negative reinforcement, pressure and release kind of training, you can teach the horse how to stop and think through it instead of, going with their instinct of pulling back and fighting against it and ending up damaging themselves even more. So ideally, I would like to use mostly positive reinforcement with him, after we get past these initial sessions. And the reason being that if I look at it from my own perspective, when I go to work and I'm asked to do things for someone else or for a company, and I expect a paycheck for that. If there was no paycheck, I wouldn't do it. And I kind of feel like I need to treat the horse the same way. So if I'm asking them to do some work for me, then I would like for them to have a paycheck that is sufficient enough for them that they want to do the work. I also feel like if there's no paycheck, that's essentially slavery. And I don't want my horse to be a slave to me. I want him to be a worker for me or a partner with me where we are working together and we're both seeing some sort of reward from that. And that may be a little controversial, but that's just my opinion and that's just how I do things. All right, so I've switched out of time lapse here just to show something. You can see with my hand, I'm kind of moving it in sort of a waving motion. And I'm doing that because I don't want it to be a surprise to him. Once I get up close to him, And then I suddenly raise my hand up and start moving my hand to pet him. A lot of times with the wild horses, they get a little freaked out by that. And so you end up getting up real close to them and you think everything's great. I'm just going to reach out and try to pet them. And they spook and go flying around the pen. And so just kind of getting him used to this motion before I'm even up close enough to even touch him. So I just wanted to explain that that's why I'm doing that with my hand. And I'm going to switch back into time lapse here again for a little bit until we get up to the point where we get our first touch. So I just switched out of time lapse again here because this is a point where he reaches out to sniff my hand and he doesn't touch my hand, but he sniffs it. And so I give him a big, huge release from that. And I just completely walk away. I just want him to know that that was a good answer. And I want to encourage that curiosity. I like that he reached his head out to meet me part way. And he got a nice big reward for that. So now we're going to go back into time lapse again. Sometimes I think that the best kind of training is actually pretty boring. I mean, this is just repetitive. This is me doing the same thing over and over and over 100 times over the course of an hour and a half, just to get a first touch. And but that's what's needed. And so, I'm going at his pace, and um, he's telling me when he's comfortable for me to get closer, and when he is, then I do. And I ask again, over and over. And you'll see here, it actually looks like from this angle, it kind of looks like he keeps giving me a first touch, but he actually isn't. He's getting like 1 inch from my hand. And as soon as I get 1 inch from his nose, he turns his face away. Like, nope, just kidding. And he does this for like 15, 20 minutes. And I let him because if he's taking his nose away when I get just 1 inch away from him, that means that he's not ready for me to touch him. And if it takes another, 15 minutes of offering my hand 1 inch away from him, then that's what I'm going to do because I want to stay within his comfort zone and I don't want the first touch to be stolen. I don't want to steal it from him. I don't want to just walk up and reach up and sneak a touch. I want him to turn his nose towards me and meet me partway and actually touch my hand. And that to me is a real first touch. It's a two-way conversation. And it's, me and him meeting partway. I wouldn't have it any other way. So I'm getting really close here to getting a first touch. And now he's not turning his face away as much. He's turning his face to me to sniff my hand, but he's still keeping that like 1 inch distance and not actually touching me. So I just keep repeating it. I just, I'll put my hand down and I'll wait maybe 10 seconds and then I'll lift it back up again and say, how about now? And he kind of sniffs it. I put it down. I wait 10 seconds, lift my hand back up. Okay, how about now? And another thing to note is that I'm being real careful in this spot here where he is because I don't want him to feel trapped. I'm leaving enough space in front of him and enough space behind him so he feels like if he needs to run from me, he can escape without needing to run over the top of me or hurt me. So here I'm switching back into normal speed because we're about to get the first touch. There he is. He brings his head up. He kind of looks, turns away, looks again. A couple of times he brings his head back and forth until he finally just reaches out and he touches me. And this is 1 hour and 28 minutes into our first session. And as soon as he touches me, I just completely walk away and end the session.